But with that mindset, we will never get there, because a government that can only work when the person in power is good is a bad government, because the next person that will come into power might not be good. A good government. Today we'll be having a conversation about democracy, family power dynamic, and how they intersect in the Nigerian society. Welcome back, guys. This is Madness in Nigeria Living, and I'm your host, Tigisi. When a lot of people think about democracy, we usually just think elections. If the government holds election, then it's a democracy. Because basically what we learned was a government by the people, for the people, for the people, by the people. Basically, we just think, if the people can vote, then it's a democracy. And we usually think it's either we have a president or we have a tyrant. It goes from either democracy to totalitarianism. But in reality, it's a spectrum. We go from democracy in one end to totalitarianism in the other end. What separates both of them is usually the information network, the little things. It's not about election. A totalitarian government on paper can have election. A democratic government on paper can have no election or limited election. So how do this work? For most countries, they find themselves somewhere along the spectrum. They go from either a democratic, ideal democratic government to a totalitarian government. From my research, I think the closest to an ideal democratic government in the world is probably Iceland. Probably. But democracy, totalitarianism is on the spectrum, and we move from one to the other. Nigeria, I would argue, is closer to totalitarianism than it is to democracy. But what does this have to do with power dynamic of the family? See, when we're discussing democracy, we often have to look at how power works, what is put in place to make balance happen in the power system. So in the democratic government, we have three arms of the government. In Nigeria, for example, we have three arms of the government. We have the judiciary, the legislature, and the executive. The legislatures are the ones who make the law. They are made up of two houses, Senate and representative. The representative is supposed to represent the everyday man, the me and you. And these people are the ones who are supposed to make the laws. The laws are corrected through different processes. That check and balance is there to see when we have made a law that is outdated or a law that needs correcting, to hold the executive accountable, because the executive are the ones who apply the law. The judiciary judge the application of the law and interpret it for us. That balance is there. But more than that balance here, the democratic government, the information flow is sort of decentralized. We have other sectors. We have the scientific community not controlled by the government. We have the journalism not controlled by the government. And all these things are put in place to create a balance. Then we have the individual man, the me and you, putting things in place through election, through protest. With that description of democracy, do you feel Nigeria practice democracy? Do you think we have freedom of the press? Do you think we have freedom of speech? Does our election work? If you look at a totalitarian government, you see that power is centralized. There's a godlike figure, a divine being, an infallible human that rules everyone. They control what you wear, how you dress, how you communicate. They have total control on paper. And this type of government has different power dynamics. The totalitarian government is up down. The democratic government is more round table, it's more decentralized. What is the power dynamic of your family? Have you ever thought about it? Did you have a power dynamic in your family where you can communicate back to your parents? You can have conversations on things that is happening, the right and wrongs. Did your parents ever feel they were accountable to you? Did they feel they should apologize to you when they wrong you? Did they feel they should correct themselves when they do something that is not right by their kids? Or did they feel they were infallible? For a lot of Nigerian parents, they believe they are supposed to be infallible, they are supposed to be perfect, and that's what they portray to their kids. That's why they will say they all took first position. That's why they are all knowing. And that infallible parent is a system that is not so far from totalitarianism, because in a totalitarian government, there's always the myth about the leader. The leader knows it all. And when you look at it from these lenses, you now see where the way we understand power dynamics affects the way we see democracy and how we believe democracy should play out. For one, if you grew up in that kind of system wherein your basic human right was abused by your parents first, by the time you start going out to the rest of the world and you start seeing the churches, the mosques, the schools abusing your basic human right, that is the norm. That is seen as the norm. What is the human right? It differs from country to country, but in Nigeria we can all agree that beating up kids and treating them as glorified slaves is sort of the norm. And these parents don't see it as anything wrong, and fundamentally it's not something I can argue that is universally wrong. It's left for ethical philosophers. But in reality, I'm talking about how it affects our democracy. Because when we grow up in a system wherein we can't voice our opinion, we can't have a conversation, it makes us more conforming, it makes us more docile. We are more likely to maintain the status quo. And if the current status quo is only serving to the government, to the people in power, that creates an up-down conversation. Why are we maintaining that system? We're maintaining it because that's all we know. In an ideal democratic government, banning of Twitter shouldn't have been a conversation, but it's not even a problem with Buhari regime or APC. It's a problem with all of our past governments. Look at PDP, you see that their policies were not really reflecting the viewpoints of the vast majority. They weren't looking at, what do the Nigerian people want, and how can we achieve it for them? They think of policies that are self-serving for the government, for the few people in power. And that's how the average Nigerian man also think. They think, how can I get power? And when I get power, how can I impose it? Because in reality, when you go out of your house, the moment you wake up, a lot of power systems are applied on you. And when you don't pay attention to the power dynamics, you might miss these tiny details. But if you pay attention, you start seeing that the power dynamic in Nigeria is usually top down. Your boss do whatsoever they want. They can keep you in the office way past your work time. But if you leave before the problem, your teachers will never wrong. They'll do whatsoever they want, punish you, and if you speak back, you get more punishment. The same is true for our parents, and this power dynamic is what shapes the way we see democracy. Now, needless to say here, my thought process came from my own experience. One thing I experienced growing up was a system wherein we could have conversation with our parents, we could talk to elderly people, we could communicate. Yes, there was still the power dynamics, they had the power, no denying, but they were self-correcting. Our parents could apologize, and when you grow up in that kind of system, your tolerance for people who don't do that drops. You are less likely to ignore someone that refuses to be held accountable. You are less likely to ignore someone that is imposing their view. And one of that thing affected me when I was in secondary school. There was one time I went to school late, and when I went to school late, my proprietor, we had like runnings here, and my proprietor said I should go back home. When I went back home, told my mom about the whole incident. She was like, she's too busy to come. She has work to go to that morning. I should go back to the school with my uncle. And when we went to my proprietor's office, the proprietor started telling a couple of lies about me, and he was just saying things I don't do. And when he was saying it, I was fascinated. I just looked at him and told my uncle, he's lying. Right in front of him, he's lying. And when my uncle left, the whole thing was resolved. But when my uncle left, the proprietor called me back and he said, that's not how you talk to an elder. Even if I felt that way, I was supposed to wait, I was supposed to do that. But my tolerance level for that was dropped. And what I'm trying to say is here, when you grow up in that kind of system wherein your tolerance level is dropped, you're more likely to hold not just others accountable, you're more likely to hold yourself accountable. And if we grow up in a system wherein we can hold ourselves accountable, we'll start applying it to every other power structure. It won't just be our families, it will be schools. Are the teachers always right? When you are the teacher, are you always right? It will be the churches, it will be the mosques, the religious gatherings. Is the leader of the religious gathering always right? Or is their individual biases affecting the way they interpret this religious text? All this kind of conversation we inherently also apply to our politics. Because if our politicians feel they are not to be held accountable, they can get away with anything, and we too feel that way, we are less likely to won't take the little things seriously. And that's why it's no surprise that in Nigeria, our election doesn't state anything. Our election, which is supposed to be a self-correcting mechanism, cannot be a self-correcting mechanism because the human beings in place feel they are infallible and they can get away with anything. And we, the masses, feel so too. So the conversation being had is the people in power should impose their viewpoint on us, and hopefully we will one day get a good government that the viewpoint they impose down on us would be good. But with that mindset, we will never get there, because a government that can only work when the person in power is good is a bad government, because the next person that will come into power might not be good. A good government is one that can recognize that everybody can be good and bad and everybody is flawed, and how can we mitigate these flaws? But we'll never see how we can mitigate these flaws when we ourselves cannot see that we create this power system. And this power system is a very simple one. When you are in a position of power, how do you hold yourself accountable? What self-correcting mechanisms are put in place? And since you conceptualize and modeled power in a dynamics that was very top down, because that's the dynamic most of us have with our parents, what are you doing to unlearn it, to pick apart this thought process so that we as a collective can make a difference? Because it takes us to make a democratic government work. Now, with this in mind, let me also say, I understand that when it comes to structural problems and systemic issues, it's not one person that can make the difference. It's not the individual family. But if we come together as a collective and start unlearning, it might take another 30 years. It might take 5 years. We will never know, but the change can happen. And the change can happen with me and you. Think about power today. Think about democracy. Think about your family. Think about totalitarianism and see how you align with the power mindset. What's your dynamic when it comes to power? And see ways you can improve on that. And that's it, guys. Thanks again for coming. See you again next week. Like, comment, and subscribe. Bye.